move. There we go.
Hello, Dr. Brad.
Back in business. Fresh coffee.
Yes.
We had a nice little effort there. I want to have one little thing. And is this regarding solving for the true? Merely entails elimination of the false.
Correct.
There you go. So falsification.
Well,
oh my. Sorry.
You can't, well, I mean, it's the problem is some things aren't reducible.
Right.
In other words, any effort to try to simplify it further only adds ambiguity that eliminates the value. So the problem is that what's a science? The science is the craft of producing testimony.
Right.
That continuously and recursively discovers the first principles within a level of precision we call a paradigm or a domain.
Right.
Right. And so science, the work of science is to produce over time a logic. Now, in some cases, chemistry, we can discover that logic fairly thoroughly. In some cases, cellular biology is way harder. In some cases, genetics, it's harder. And at some below chemistry, surely the physics of the atomic physics, in other words, particles and elements, which we call atoms, that is something we understand the first principles of. We're not quite sure. We have some. I think we know and can't admit that we understand the logic of what we call the quantum universe, right? And that's because of certain silly taboos, right? And we have no idea what's below that. There has to be at least one level below that. And then conversely, I mean, above biology, we have neurology, thought, right? And language and demonstrated behavior and cooperation and group strategies, right? We have this whole spectrum. So when you say, I can't remember how you phrased it, but can you remember how you phrased it?
Solving for the truth is the elimination of falsehood.
Right. So you solve for the truth by eliminating falsehood to the point at which you've discovered the first principles, where those first principles are consistent downward and upward, in other words, across the spectrum of paradigms, and which they're downward and upward consistent because those first principles are constructed from the first principle of evolutionary, what I call evolutionary computation.
Yep.
Or discovery of stable relations. So you discover, what you do is you create a system of measurement by falsification, which you then use to produce utility. In other words, what can I do with these facts, right? And so what we seek to do in any discipline is produce those first principles necessary for which we can then falsify any theories we have, including the theories of the good, because all logics are falsificationary, right? And so as long as your theory of the good survives falsification, in other words, it's not bad, in other words, somehow reciprocal, then it's good. And the reason is that because the good is the choice, right? And a bad is not.
No, it's not allowed. Yeah.
So this isn't terribly, I mean, I don't see this as terribly difficult. It's just learning how to switch from justification to falsification and survival, or learning how to move from scriptural interpretation to Darwinian evolution, which is which is really the causal difference, is the big shift, and we're simply not. We haven't completed that big shift.
Well, we're just getting started, I think.
Well,
Sorry for the diversion. That took longer than I anticipated. My apologies.
no, I mean, no, it's a great example of some things aren't reducible,
That's it.
right? They're not reducible beyond the description of their cause by using first principles. And, this is the problem we face, is that if we use the term science or logic, right, or even epistemology, people might think of that in justificationary terms. They almost certainly do. They don't think
it is almost necessarily true.
Right.
So.
And so they haven't learned how to think like a grown-up, which is falsificationary, right? And I said that grown-up thing just to see if I could get you to smile.
Just to see what happened. Did it work?
Just to see if I could get you to smile.
Just like that. That one didn't even register, man. Sorry, boss. Your legend is not your I know you too well or something. I don't know. It's just like that. But that one didn't bother me in the least place. Now we're ready to get down to work. See,
Doolittle's always teasing me, right?
That's it.
Testing.
Just seeing if you can find a sacred cow to step on.
See if I can add a little entertainment value to a serious discussion.
It's very serious. We're talking about the law, baby.
Okay, so now,
right.
When last we met our intrepid travelers,
right.
God, it's like we need our poster to illustrate where we are. So
I haven't heard from my friend, the one who wants to make the posters, Mr. Forrest, I believe. Please wait. Hit like, subscribe, leave comments. Thank you.
All right, so let me frame again. So as we stated to somewhat at length yesterday, I started out trying to work from logic upward. You helped me frame it as starting from the first principles of the physical world upward. This creates a great skeleton to build everything on. During our discussion, I said I'm going to work from ethics or reciprocity outward. So there's at least three, we know of at least three channels to cover the material, right?
Right.
And of those three, it's true that ethics is probably morality, reciprocity. Outward is probably the most intuitive, right? Because it gets you to see something you understand fastest without having to hold any magic in your head. And so we would say, what is this thing called ethics and law? And then so once we got far enough, we'd go into first principles, right? And then we could talk about policies, right? I mean, it's a sort of, how do you slice this freaking pizza so that we can eat it, right? I mean, it's just, otherwise it's flopping around.
Right, it's a giant mess.
So we began with reciprocity, demonstrated interest, and truth, right?
Right.
Or I went past truth and then came back to it. And then we said, okay, well, what then is law? We covered what the kind of laws there were and what made a law legitimate versus legal and moral and whatever. And then we went through all that and said, okay, well, what is this natural law thing? Which is what is the maximum means by which humans can organize evolutionary computation? What is the least false method by which humans can organize?
Minimization of frictions of transaction for cooperation, maximum
Correct.
cooperation.
So, and that is self-determination, reciprocal assurance of self-determination by self-determined means, consisting of tests of sovereignty and demonstrated interest and reciprocity and display word and deed, resulting in markets for dispute resolution, association, cooperation, reproduction, production, commons, polities, and or, and at the cost of the suppression of the reproduction of those unfit, demonstrably unfit by those for those markets by their own actions in them. Right? I mean, that's the natural law. That is, what is the 0 point of the human universe? It turns out to be what's the 0 point for any sentient being's universe, because it wouldn't make any difference whether, as long as you're able to consciously cooperate. It's just a matter of your ability to predict how to suppress irreciprocities. Therefore, the law consists of the continuous recursive suppression of irreciprocity by their market discovery in courts of conflict. So the law as expressed that way is not political, it's scientific. Right? And there is no more rapid means by which humans can evolve under a condition of prosperity without being subject to decline. It doesn't mean that those markets for discovery, innovation, application, adaptation, and evolution, it doesn't mean that we won't go through cycles of discovery, exhaustion, discovery, exhaustion, discovery, exhaustion, discovery, exhaustion, and oops, collapse, discovery, and exhaustion, oops, discovery. It doesn't mean we're not going to exhaust opportunities and fail to discover a new solution to the problem. This is why history doesn't always move forward. Right? So we went through this evolution to describe that the natural law is not an opinion. It's the scientifically optimum means by which humans can cooperate in a condition of prosperity, continuously defeating the Red Queen. And therefore we look at the civilizations and we discover why Europeans evolved faster in the Bronze Age of the steppe and the Indo-European expansion, in the Mediterranean age of the Age of Reason, Greco-Roman reason, and in the Atlantic age of empiricism, and in the global age of science. All right, so why did we move so fast in the bronze, iron, and steel ages? Is because for ancestral reasons, we discovered how to organize by law first instead of state first or religion first, which are the 3 means of cooperation: state force, legal reciprocity, or religious conformity. Right. So we discovered the fastest way. Now, the order of speed is law, state, religion. Right? And the order in which you discover these things determines your group's velocity. But that context said, what we've done is we've explained, okay, what is this law? Right? What is this thing we call the natural law of self-determination? So reciprocal assurance by force of arms, of reciprocity, of a self-determination by self-determined means, by tests of sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity, and display word and deed, markets, blah, 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 at the cost of suppression of the reproduction of the demonstrably unfit for those markets. So what are you laughing at?
Now I know how you pronounce parentheses, ... parentheses. You say blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that's for the audience, so they understand how to read Kurt's writing, because it's like some of these symbols are a little tricky.
Yeah, so
I figured it out.
save
just now.
myself some oxygen.
It took me a year.
So knowing that, though, what those terms mean in that statement? What does self-determination by self-determination determined means mean? What does reciprocal insurance of that mean? And how can it be brought about? What do we mean by sovereignty and demonstrated interests? And what are those demonstrated interests? Right? What is reciprocity, the display word indeed? How do we test it? And what is the function? Why do those different markets for association, cooperation, production, reproduction, commons, polities, and war exist? Right? Why do those markets exist? In other words, we have definitely developed those markets, and we need those markets for cooperating at different scales. But why do we have them? Why are they tests of evolutionary fitness? And then lastly, why does this happen to come at the cost of the reproduction of those who are demonstrably unfit for those markets? Which means, why is natural selection continue to be necessary?
Right? Okay, but that's all precursor to getting to where we are now. Yeah.
Right. I'm just trying to recap for the audience.
Yeah, I know. I realize that. I call that the precapitulation.
And so once we're there, we said, okay, what do those terms mean? We went and defined those terms. But then we got into things like, okay, how do we test reciprocity in display word and deed? And how do we produce reciprocal insurance? So we went over to this thing, and then when we say reciprocity, display word and deed, what are some of the tests we can supply? In the private, in the personal, private, semi-private,
right,
and common, right? So we have all these dimensions we had to test. So we actually went through all that shit.
It was. Well, I wouldn't say it that, but it's surprising. It's like, wow, that kind of went in a direction I didn't expect.
What did?
Just this last little aspect of the dimensions and the contextualization of the various expectations for display word and deed.
Right, and they're congregation, observation, recording, display, sound, approach, greeting, speech, acknowledgement, introduction, conversation, solicitation, begging, promotion, blah, 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 promotion, action, usus, fructus, emancipation, homesteading, and abuses, right? I mean, those are just, and there's more in between there. I mean, I've tried to cover them, but I mean, the point of that is to create enough of a system of measurement that people can say, well, that's just between recording and display, or congregation and observation. So you can find some system of measurement, but we tend to keep things at this moral level, so we have to take them down to the point where they're testable in court.
Which is to say operational, like you recognize it when you see it, because
yes,
that's what it looks like.
Yes. So it prevents people from saying something doesn't exist or something isn't covered. So this is why people tease me for all this enumeration, right? But this enumeration is necessary because enumeration is what disambiguates.
I know we would call it. Hang on. Exhausting. I know it's exhausting exhaustion. Is what it is.
Well, I mean, what do we say the method consists of? Continuous recursive disambiguation, exhausting the opportunity for ambiguity.
That's it. It's
right?
Exhausting, though. It's like exhausting. It's like, exhausting. Wow. When you wiped me out last time, I got wiped out. I was like, wow, I was stunned by it. It's like, wow, this is exhausting.
It is exhausting.
It's very, like I say, I gotta bring a hat in here because I would tip my hat for you, because it is, I recognize the value of this work, which is only can be recognized as truly exhausting.
Right.
You have conducted for so long, man. Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, so the only things we touched on that were sort of, I wanted to add, were discussions of privacy and attention.
Right.
Because those usually aren't covered, so I added discussions of privacy and intention.
Okay.
I didn't go over demonstrated interests again. We've been over
Oh.
that 10 times, right? We don't need to do that again. And so I didn't feel that was necessary. So at that point, if we go back to our illustration here, I will try to find it,
All right.
and then I will show it. If you go back to where we are, I can, if you let me share my screen.
Of course, you've been pre-selected as this host, I believe.
You are a gentleman and a scholar.
And way ahead of the curve too. All right.
So if we go back to our position here,
Yes.
we've defined reciprocal insurance, self-determination, sovereignty, demonstrated interest, reciprocity. And we've talked about the minimum obligations, rights, and alienations for these things, right? Right. So we've just said, you're required to reciprocally defend people's demonstrated interests, right? You have an obligation to do it. You have the right to be insured by others, and this right is inalienable by you or others without committing a crime by trying to alienate others or yourself from it. In other words, there is no escape from the responsibility for reciprocal insurance by force of arms if necessary. The sovereignty, the self-determination of self-determined means by tests of sovereignty and demonstrated interest and reciprocity and display word and deed. There's no, you don't get to say, I don't want to do that, or I'm afraid. Because that's what, that reciprocity is what gives you it. If you can't do that, then you can't claim you're a citizen. You can say you're a subject, but not a citizen. But so after we're down to that part, though, we have to start talking about the institutions that allow us to judge those disputes, right? So
Okay.
there are a small number of natural rights. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we have covered those.
Yes.
Rights, obligations, and alienations. It's a tiny number. Right? It's
True.
You must insure these people from these demonstrated interests, and you must do things truthfully and reciprocally, and you only have those rights enumerated, right? Rights that are enumerated, at least in public, they're enumerated in this thing, and divided, and then these conditions, personal, private, semi-private, public.
Right.
And so now you get into, how do we resolve that difference? Right? Well, in other words, what's court?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Then, okay, so great. Then how do we produce these markets we're talking about?
Okay.
Right. Now, so I was trying, this is where I'm trying to decide what to do. I was trying to separate, to keep us if I can do this here. Where am I? I'm about there, right? So what I was trying to do, I guess I can do this, can't I? I'm trying to figure out if I should now go back to first principles, or if I should go forward and keep going with how to adjudicate law.
So what would the discourse on first principles look like at this point?
we would go back to the first causes, like, and work our way through the. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. We would go down to this part here,
Ah,
and we would start on
yeah,
the ternary logic. And this would be the list of our first principles. And then we would, all right, so the question is whether we have really two, we have first principles, courts, governments, and policies.
right.
Right, and so it's just a question of how we address those. Now, when we started doing this, I meant to go only through the first principles of the law.
Yeah.
And then go through the ternary logics before we talked about government. Right? It's possible we could talk about government before we talk about these, and then we go from these to policies. Or we could just forget these and just go through to policies. In other words, go court, government, policies. The reason I like this is social science.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we really need to.
The question I would ask is this a recapitulation of these first principles as discussed elsewhere in the overall piece?
I think it might be.
Now, if so, then I would think it'd be unnecessary to do.
Yeah,
so.
let's just go forward, continue forward with courts and law, because what's happening during all these discussions we're having is we're covering all those ternary logics, right? As we go along. The reason this is useful is this is like poster material, right?
Yes.
This is just, these are the facts, man. Right? Man organizes, right?
That's right.
All right. These are his organizing biases. Well, we cover all these things during each discussion.
Will you cut and paste that and ship it to me that I can get poster makers making posters?
Is it in condition for poster makers to make posters?
I'm asking.
I'm not sure it's there yet.
I did not take my motion sickness pills, sir.
Sorry, boss.
Just I didn't just throw that in for the audience.
Sorry.
Because it's like, okay, don't follow this.
Don't do
it will
that.
hurt you, man.
That's a bad idea.
That's medical advice. That's unsolicited, and we could call it a Good Samaritan act by me, so I cannot be held liable for anything.
Okay. So we started with ethics and we're working our way up, and we're covering these first principles, well, all over the place, really. And you and I started covering these. And then before we went over to this, so we'll always go back. We'll go back to finishing that part. All right. So I can keep going forward with the adjudication of law.
Carry on.
All right, so let's do that. So now that we've given people this context, you can talk about it from the logics up, you can talk about it from first principles up, or you could talk about it from ethics outward. Well, what we're doing is we're talking about ethics outward, and we're doing that primarily because, as Brad just showed, we've already covered an awful lot of the first principles, and realistically, once you get the triangles and the basic method, it's like, okay, this is pretty fucking obvious. Besides the fact that Kurt repeats every one of those little ternary logics about 30 times in a row, just so it makes sure it sticks in your head. And so that's what we'll stick with. We'll stick with that, that understanding. So now we get into the question of how to resolve differences.
Okay.
Now, this is extremely important. Is in Western Civ, there's no authority there's only, in other words, there's no via positiva authority, right?
Yes.
Headmen, chieftains, kings, they have certain rights, keeping the king's peace, etc. But those rights are limited by the tradition, which is the tradition is the natural law. And that varies from time to time, but we try to get all high and mighty, right? But we discussed yesterday how there used to be a slave economy, a serf economy, a freeman economy, a citizen economy, and a sovereign economy. And this is just a scale of responsibility, which is demonstrated responsibility, not given or not pretense. And that a nobility is basically a family who can hold that responsibility over time. Well, in the present world, we need a directed economy, a command economy. We need an organized commons economy. We need a private production economy, and we need a industrial or political economy. We need those things, but we don't. So what we do is we sort of throw people out there, and we don't give them the protections. Right, we treat them all as if they're middle class, and they all can be middle class. So we treat them as they're all capable of the same amount of responsibility, and we do that so because the formation of our governments is based on taxation, where taxation is different from, in other words, taxing when taxation is different. In other words, saying yay or nay to taxation is different from saying voting on policy. Right? It's two different things. I may have I may be able to vote for this or not because I can afford it or not. That's different from saying I have the skill, insight, and necessary to judge whether this policy should be enacted for this different skill. So so in the absence of authority, we still require decidability. In other words, in the absence of via positiva authority, we still require via negativa decidability. Someone still has to be a judge. Right?
That's right. So to decide what is the truth in the circumstance, is that fair? Or what is not false? Or
what is not false or irreciprocal?
Less false and irreciprocal.
Since falsehood is irreciprocity, right? It's determining what's reciprocal and not.
So deciding which is irreciprocal and which is reciprocal.
Right.
The decision.
And resolution of disputes. Resolution of disputes is one thing. Resolution decisions via negativa, via positivas. It's like raising taxes is a via negativa, right? I should be able to veto that, right? But policy is dependent upon competency. So what the problem we have is that we give everybody the same say in the production of policy, where they're not really able to do that.
Okay.
And then we don't insure people at the bottom because they're asked to demonstrate responsibility. They don't have the means of basically comprehending or carrying.
Yes.
So we're unfair to them. All
right.
So when we come to a court is conducted under the same issue. A court is in other words, the same constraints. There's no authority. There's only decidability. And this is incredibly important because you understand our jury system. Right. The jury decides. Right? The market decides. The jury is a market.
For
resolution of disputes.
Okay.
It isn't like the European models where the judge decides. Our jury decides. Whenever you don't have a jury, you lack juridical defense.
Right.
So, so you have a jury, and what the judge is a referee.
Right.
So he's trying to prevent deception, right? And basically he's trying to, realistically, he's trying to manage a scientific investigation.
Right.
Which is where science comes from the court. And so what you find is that the judge referees, and you have adversarial competition between the plaintiff and the defendant. Two parties, doesn't matter which one it is. And the judge is the referee, and the instead of the emperor up and down, the jury does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is because there's no authority. Right? We don't, when you're self-determination by self-determined means, insured by the polity, a random selection of jurors is your insurers.
That's right. So they're just determining how the insurance company feels.
They're a proxy for the rest of the population of people who insure self-determination by self-determined means, by sovereignty and demonstrated interest, and the demand for reciprocity and display word and deed.
I want to relate this to the terminology we would use in the insurance industry. Who makes the decision in the insurance industry? Who is that?
If I know.
There's got to be a name for that job, right? Because it's like, who decides what is insurable versus what is not insurable? There's got to be that's a function that does occur in my interaction with insurance companies. Is there a name for it?
Yeah, there's a name for it. I just can't.
I'm not aware of it either, but I just wanted to put it in as to put it. Blah blah blah, because that's a proxy that should be. It's a resonance.
I don't know why it's not coming to me.
It's
I think
noteworthy.
my ex-wife does. What's that? I have one of my ex-wives.
She does that.
I hate saying that. I can't tell you.
I want you to know this. It's like it's a bad sign. My uncle had 3 wives, and I look at it as a sign of slow learning. Just sorry. That was sorry, kids. Please don't mark that one. I had to say it because I don't get to say that much to Kurt. It's me poking back at him a little bit.
If I were kind to myself, I would say that each wife, the end of each relationship is a result of one of my illnesses. It's actually true.
That's good, Kurt. That makes you feel better. I like you feeling better.
I still don't understand why they want you afterwards. I just don't understand that. I just don't.
I got nothing to say, man. Because if you're trying to understand women, stop it. That's medically ill advised.
That's right. Right. Don't. There's no order in the chaos.
There is an order there, but you won't be able to discern it, I'm afraid.
I love them all.
That's right. Okay, so I wrote a little ... for the insurance company decider name.
Yeah.
Okay, moving forward. Are you prepared to share your screen again?
Well, yeah, I guess
I got to get you back on the rails, man.
I know. I'm just got to remember what the fuck I was talking about before we went down a rattle.
The judge is a referee.
Okay, so the judge is a referee, but the point I was trying to make is that the jury is a random selection of your peers.
That is the other insurers.
That is the other insurers.
In fact, it is only a representative of the insurers that we're talking about, because it's not anybody that isn't insuring anybody. It's not anybody that's not responsible by their own choice and capacities.
Right. So that's why that's what a jury means. Right? It's a representation of your insurers of self-determination by self-determined means. And the reason is partly so that the law may not be misapplied to the condition.
Right.
So one of the things they hate is jury nullification,
Oh, yes.
because a jury has three choices in
That's
logic.
right.
They don't want you to, they'll throw you out. It's like, I know no one will, it's like, no one will ever allow me on a jury. First of all, I would coerce the jury any decision I want. I mean, it would just happen, right? But the second reason is that I believe in nullification, and they ask you that question often. And the second thing is, of course, I'm a conservative, which means they never get on there.
I'm apparently in the same boat.
Yeah.
The fact that you mentioned jury nullification just buoyed my heart quite significantly. That's
Well, but you have guilty, innocent, or null, right? And so you have those three choices, which is positive, negative, and undecidable. Which is it's undecidable. There's enough information to acquit, which is false, and there's enough information to accuse, and there's enough information to claim they're innocent, and there's enough certainty, in other words, and ambiguity that they're guilty. And so this is not this is pure logic, right? So they have that. So you have those three choices. Now the judge can get pissed at you, right? Because he has an obligation to make sure you're actually making the right decision, right? Because juries become confused, and it's right. I mean, it happens. So, but the judge will say, well, I mean, you can only come back with second degree or manslaughter because under this. Well, that's when the jury says, well, I mean, I'm sorry, Your Honor, we're willing to do it as something else, right? As something minor, but we're only willing to do it as something more severe, but we're not willing to do that. Now the judge can now argue with them or whatever, but they didn't do whatever the fuck they want, and great.
I would like to point the audience to the story of William Penn in England, who was the origin of the jury nullification. The story is worthy of some study.
It's actually very worthy. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Kurt.
So because there are unjust laws, and there are just laws unjustly applied, and there are just laws insufficiently applied.
Right.
Right. So I mean, the law is a fucking network of interdependent findings, right? That are accumulated over by evidence of individual disputes. And what happens over time is that the courts start using this information to coalesce on a general rule. And the courts like that. They want to say, hey, I didn't do this. All these juries and all these lawyers and all these judges and all this, right? Because that's when I'm doing my job. I'm engaging in decidability, not choice. That's what a judge is looking for. Give me some way to decide this. So the problem when we go to judges is we think the guy's trying to choose. He's not. He's trying to decide. It's a difference. He can personally choose, or he can judicially decide. And he's looking for a means of decidability. The lawyer's jobs are to give him that means so that he can correctly instruct the jury on what it is they're deciding.
There you go. Wow, how about that?
So does this make sense?
Yes.
It's not like TV so much,
Mostly not.
The part that's like TV is, as John Adams said, whoever tells the best story generally wins. Right? And so what you're trying to do is take a bunch of evidence. You're trying to take a story, a theory,
right,
and support the evidence. And in that, you're trying to show that the person's frame of mind was either sinful, right? Negativa. Failing due diligence. I mean, which is what happens, right? I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Mistaken, right?
Right.
Or believes they're doing good and this is an accident.
Right.
Right. I mean, you're trying to find, right? Or so you've got this problem to solve. And the problem is that it's actually really hard. I mean, it's really hard to understand all that stuff when you're wrapped up in it because you become emotionally involved. I mean,
Right.
I love my business legal cases because it's just another fucking cost of doing business. I mean, it's going to affect me financially, but it doesn't affect me emotionally.
Personally, right.
Yeah, right. It's when this personal stuff, it makes me as stupid as everybody else, right? Because I'm just angry, right, or upset or whatever, like anybody else. And I feel like the courts are just as unjust as everybody else does for the reasons we explain. That the court doesn't the court absolved itself from morality, and it absolved itself from externality. Right. Right. And this is this sin of this sin of the court has become pervasive enough that people rightfully feel unjust.
They noticed.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so the second thing is that in our system, which I wrote about the other day, somebody asked me, is that in Russia, for example, I'm going to give this great example because it is a really great example. If you do something they don't like, they just throw you in prison, right, and accuse you of a bunch of random shit that isn't true.
Right.
Right. And you suffer that way. In America, they don't throw you in prison. They throw you in the system. And the system tortures you.
Yes.
For a year or two. And what they do is they impoverish you. They make you lose your job. Right? They make you lose your house. Right? What's the fucking difference between what they do in Russia and what they do here? There fucking isn't any. I mean, to some degree, you'd rather have what happens in Russia. It's honestly bullshit.
As opposed to
excuse made bullshit, right? I mean, it's
justified
bullshit. So I mean, it just to some degree, it's just, and it kills me, you know. Or Ukraine is great because the way it works, it does. Of course, Ukraine's going to be a completely different country now, but you walk it. With the thing on Ukraine is, as long as you bribe the judge, you'll get a fair trial. But you have to bribe a judge to get the fair trial. I mean, that's the hard part, right? And it's like, so whereas here you have to say it's legal fees and whatever, and lawyers are expensive, and the courts waste phenomenal amounts of time with excess proceduralism, and everybody avoids every responsibility at all. And there's they selectively choose what information is submitted. They have no moral foundation for it, and the court treats its time as more valuable than yours, right? I mean, it's just all this crap that goes on, and we put up with it. We put up with it because, thankfully, God, we have rule of law. We just have it poorly administered, but at least we have some rule of law. But anyway,
that was a backhanded. I like that a lot.
Well, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, we have real defensive property here. We do. We have real defensive property. It works great. It's political law that doesn't work, right? And the great thing is they obscure this incredibly beautiful rule of law regarding property and interest by pretending this political law is from the same root. It's not. It's completely, it might as well be fucking theology or, you know, or they make some, well, it passed Congress, therefore it's legitimate. No, that's called positive law. That's
Yep,
called,
yep.
you know, that's not law.
Oh, no, I have to get you back on track.
Okay.
Because we were here to discuss discussions of privacy and attention.
No, I said we made it through privacy.
Oh, I see.
And that. What I'm talking about is I'm trying to paint a picture of what the court is and does, as opposed to what people expect of it.
That's right.
All right. And so I've illustrated a couple things. That the key points I wanted to make is that the in continuing with natural law tradition, the tradition of European people, the prohibition on authority, right? The distributed insurance of one another. The jury is the decider. They're your insurers, and that's who you're talking to. The judge, despite their desire to control the whole fucking process, which seems to be the direction things are going, is becoming more French, is there to say, is there to referee. Once his real decision making or choice is in what to do about it in order to remedy the situation. So the judge will take recommendations of remedy from both parties, and he will come up with, well, you know, you're going to pay this much money and serve this much time or do this much community service or
Based on the decision of the jury.
Right. And so that's where he has discretion.
The jury decides the facts.
Varies from state to state, by the way, a little bit, but the jury decides guilt or innocent. The judge has discretion and remedy.
Okay.
And the reason is that you want that to be a technical decision. You don't be, otherwise you get these juries that give, you know, absurd awards, right? So, which are completely, I mean, they tend to, juries are not generally capable of making quantitative judgments. They are very good at making qualitative judgments. And so there's that. The problem with our system is that in the UK, you have an advocate and a barrister.
Yes.
The advocate is the person who works for you, and the barrister argues before the court. So they have less of this bullshitting, less theatrics, because these the barristers are officers of the court, right? They're there to find out what's true.
Okay.
In our system, they're there to win, right? That's why, right? So that's what I like about our system, is that I do pro se all the time, right? I argue my own stuff all the time, as long as it's within my domain. Some things are not. Stuff I'm doing right now isn't. Then I like about our system is that it's very communal still. It's almost tribal still. You could get up there if you want, and you can make an ass of yourself, right? And mostly the judge will put up with it, unless you're making a circus of the court.
Right.
I love that we can do that, right? To some degree, I'd rather have that and all the shenanigans that goes on in our court system, all the theatrics that are embarrassing to us and very hysterically embarrassing to the rest of the world.
Right.
Right. But on the other part of me says, you know, it just works better when procedurally, when you have barristers whose only a job is to discover the truth. They can't, all right, they have, all right. And so you have you have someone a lawyer who advocates for you, but a barrister who has limits. I kind of like that. That seems to be a better answer.
Okay.
But the point is to have the jury and understand who the jury is. All right, so that's what the court is. What was the second thing I was trying to make out? I was trying to show what's wrong with our system of the court, in that when you see problems with our law, if I say, I'm going to see if I can break this into two pieces. You're going to find that it's the divergence between what's moral, I mean reciprocal, and what the court does. The court's lack of responsibility for externalities. In other words, and this is where all the game playing by lawyers comes in, right?
Wait, repeat that for me, please.
The court fails to, for example, here's one I've been involved in: tortuous interference. I could screw with your business by screwing with you.
Oh, yeah.
And by screwing with you and screwing with your business, I've threatened you by other than the court. Right. And so what's happened is I've used non-juridical means by which to obtain
coercive influence in social environment.
Whereas torturous interference should involve those externalities. In other words, I should not be able to involve myself in your family, your job, your business.
Right. So it's a failure to account for that externality.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's a great example. So that, and the second thing is the irresponsibility the court has with money and time.
Yes.
And the fact that the court doesn't meet market demand with time. In other words, we don't produce enough judges or enough courtrooms.
Right.
And they do what the courts have become the same problem as what you perceive in the medical business.
Monopoly problem.
Correct. So secondly, the people in the court aren't accountable.
Mm-hmm.
They have no accountability at all, really.
Right.
And so that's what's really frustrating. And then there is, in the European system, you know how I'm always complaining that we need a priestly court for manners, a manor court for, we need this hierarchy, and we need the right to petition our representatives for redress of grievances. In other words, I have a right to petition the nobility who's in charge of my territory for a redress of my grievances. Well, go ahead and try to get your grievances redressed by your fucking representative or senator. Good fucking luck. Unless you're walking in with a big fucking check, you don't exist, right? Right, and that's because the government's too big, right? I mean, it's just too. It's too much power distance, right, between the individual and the ability to rectify it.
Which
and this happened.
It's interesting. So power distance is like, it's inversely proportional to the concentration of power, or it's proportional. Power distance is proportional to the concentration of power. So it's overly concentrated and distant.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just I can't remember. We have like one lawyer for every 300 people. I can't remember what our ratio of doctors to people is. Do you know?
I don't know the number. I would say it's about similar to that.
U.S. ratio of doctors to patients. Ratio of doctors to patients to U.S. For the U.S. 295 per 100,000.
So that's 30. No, 300.
No, it's 295 per 100,000.
Yeah.
That's 2.9 per 1,000.
That's right.
Right, so it's 3 per 1,000. So that's 1 per 300. Yeah, you're right. It's about the same. Oh, damn. That's something that I didn't know before. That was good.
Thank you. Watch the boys go through some math.
Well, I mean, I just.
That was good, man.
Thankfully. Physicians per 1,000 people in the United States This is another one, the World Bank. I love World Bank. There's always, well, this one says 1.6, no, 2.4. So it's
right on the same frame.
same. It's in the same. Okay. Rule of thumb at that level is good enough, right? Not that you can have half a doctor, although sometimes you do.
That one struck home.
Uh,
That's undeniably true, I'm afraid.
what's your opinion on nurse, like the nurse to doctor hierarchy?
Ah.
In other words,
Well, here's what's interesting, and I noticed this, and I told the story about this some weeks ago, which is when the nice patient passed out on the asphalt in front of my office, and I was outside when the team came from the emergency department. They just walk up the hill. It's just a little bit past the helicopter pad that they had to walk up a little hill, and they came in, and then the lady was coming to, and the nurse shows up, and he's checking her out, and he made a comment that upset the daughter, which was not, I scrupulously avoided. I found that to be a little bit off. And then he asked the lady, do you want to go to the ER? And she's just coming to, and I'm like, she needs to go to the ER. And he says, it's back chatter, so it's insubordination. He says, I can't take her against her will. And I'm like, I walked away because I'm like, this is just silly talk. I'm not having it. It's just not even worth entering into, because it's the medical establishment HR system is pushing this thesis that everybody's equally as in the team, right? So it's diminishing the value of the hierarchy of decision making in the medical arena. So it's like this. It's like, no, she's got to go to the ER. That's a doctor order. It's not like a mild suggestion that the team might consider. Yeah. How hard was that to figure out?
But let's go. Let's use this. Yeah. Because what does a medical license do? It says you're capable of insuring, right? You're an insurer of those persons, right? You're an insurer.
It more like says I'm responsible when something goes bad.
Well, I mean, but that's the right. So the problem is if those two things are out of sync, right? If your ability to influence and your responsibility are out of sync, that means someone's stealing.
Yeah, there's a definite problem here, and it's like, okay, something is out of whack, and it's just, yeah.
Well, I mean, of course,
that's why I walked away, because I'm like, this, I can't be responsible for this behavior, because I issued my order and then I walked away, despite the back chatter, right? Yeah. And it went the way I wanted it to, but it's like, okay, I made my order, I just walk away.
Yes, well, that's the right answer, of course. Then, of course, I've had friends tell me, certainly nurses tell me, I don't know why nurses like me, I don't get it really, but nurses tell me that you know how, you know, the doctors don't often pay enough, don't have the time to understand what's happening to a patient, and so you can get given the instructions to give the patient the wrong medicine or whatever. And I'm like, that's why there's two of you.
That's right.
It's you're both gonna make mistakes.
Here's that. Yeah, no, there's a guarantee. It's not yet. And it's interesting. So here's how this conversation looks. So here's me being an intern in the ICU with these Vietnam era war nurses, and I write the order, and the nurse says, "Doctor, are you sure that's what you want to do?" And I think about it, and I go, "Yeah, it is." And then she had to come back and tell me that it wasn't working later, and I'm like, "Okay, I got you. I get it." Listen to the
no, but the problem is that they think it's a bug, it's a feature, right? Right. The fact that you have to check each other isn't a bug.
Right. So when I talk to the pharmacist, and I will, like, routinely when I write a pediatric antibiotic, for say, they're based on weight. And so what I will do at the bottom of the script, there's a little place for comments to the pharmacist. Is I will write 35-pound patient. Now he's got some responsibility, and he has a way to check, and he's checking on me and making sure I'm not doing something just, yeah. And it's just checks and balances, and it's well appreciated.
Yep. So, so this is one of the problems that bother me is that um, there seems to be a loss of the military hierarchy of duty in the medical business that was brought over from the military. In other words, I'm the captain, but you're not supposed to let me fuck up.
That's right. You're supposed to make sure
Yes.
that doesn't happen because your interests, the patient, the nurse say represents the patient's interests.
That's right.
And she cannot hurt the patient, even if the doctor orders her to do something stupid. She's
Right.
not supposed to do it because she has enough knowledge to go, that's not the right
Getting
answer.
it wrong is not a bug, right? I mean, those the two people having to correct each other isn't a bug.
No,
It's a feature.
That's right.
It's
That's
like
right.
we have sergeant. I would say just compare the nurses are the sergeants,
Oh, yes.
right? All
That's
right, and the sergeants are really what holds down, right? The staff, right?
They're operational.
And the doctors are the officers. And this is just how it works, right? I mean, and it works great that way, right? But you know, as long as you can tell, the nurse can say, "Doctor, are you sure that's right?" Because I don't.
No, and that's like, and you, it's well appreciated.
Yeah,
It's well appreciated. And the weird.
it's well appreciated as long as it's not snide.
That's right. And it's never, it generally isn't. They
Yeah.
appreciate what we do and what we appreciate what they do, because it's like, I don't want to do what you do. And they agree with that. You don't want to do what I do, and I don't want to do what you do. We agree.
So what about the scale? This is the issue I'm trying to get at, is there's a scale of nurses. And there's a point at which a nurse can do some doctor things.
Yes, there is. Nurses have there's grades of nurses, and at some point they become what they call a physician extender, and their nurse practitioners are independent medical practitioners, so they
Correct.
do behave in a manner that is consistent with a primary care provider, perhaps. Okay, and it's like, so what is the limit of that? I don't know what their scope of practice is. It's different than a physician has unlimited. Like no lie, I could do brain surgery. I have a license that says I have an unlimited license to do stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't mean I'm going to try it. And you, I hope you're smart enough to avoid that plan, because that's not happening. We're not going to do that. But the nurse practitioners have a similar thing, and I don't know what they might have a limit. I don't know what their limit.
They have. I'd have to go look at it. But the point is there seems to be a need for that.
That's what's gone on is there's physician extenders have been expanded because there's not enough physicians by this political standard. So they relax the capacity to provide these services by creating physician extenders, which are the physician assistants who are required to be under medical supervision of a physician, and then the nurse practitioners who are not. Those are the two classes that I'm aware of. And so the purpose was to generate more practitioners to take care of more demand for the population that wants to see more doctors.
Yeah, but the point being that not everybody. I mean, I've been in a situation where I just have a sinus infection. I don't need to see the doctor for that, right? I mean,
that's not necessary.
It's not necessary, you know. So I just wanted your opinion on that, because my experience is there's an awful lot of duties that fall into that, and I don't like doctors being burdened with runny noses.
This is what I do on the telemedicine business. It's like, it's okay. This is what caused me to understand it how I do, which is like, okay, this is a self-reflective process, because I'm like this. It's like, this is doesn't require much decision-making processing, right? It's very plain forward, and it's just communication is all that's left. How do I communicate it to you efficiently and quickly, and then not get mad because you're thick or whatever? and I take full responsibility for the interaction, regardless. If I make you mad, it's my fault. And I recognize there's a potential for that. So I take the full responsibility for all of it. And it's a growth experience. Isn't that special? Now let's get back to work. The people want to hear about the law, not some silliness.
Yeah.
So we were on errors of the court and the law.
Well, in other words, what people sense is wrong about the court is correct.
Yes.
It provides bad customer service at a high cost,
Mm.
right, in an untimely fashion that is not bound by moral norms, and is doesn't account for externalities, which privileges the court as if its time is more precious than yours, and does not pay attention to the customer service necessary for a court to maintain the trust and respect of the population.
Right.
And so all those things that people say, those are all true. The problem is how do you fix that?
Right.
Well, the way you fix that is that you write down what's expected.
That was a. Wait, so I want to make a comment here because this is good. Okay, so I will go to this. It's archaeological, this conversation that we're going to have now. So
It's what?
Archaeological. You're going to like this. It's going to be
I like
why. The issue is this, and the question is this. I will pose the question: why did humans invent writing? And it turns out the first writing is cuneiform tablets, in which the cuneiform comes from. They will make a plot in Babylon. You make a clay holder. Okay, so Kurt's supposed to bring 3 sheep in the summertime. So we put 3 little effigies of sheep, and then we put it in this little clay bag, and then we cook it with little cuneiform things. Says there are 3 sheep in here that Kurt is supposed to bring in the springtime. And so they're like this, because it's not like this. It's not like they thought Kurt might forget, but Kurt has an incentive to forget. And so Kurt will forget. He said, no, I said 2 sheep, man. What are you talking about? And it's like the writing is the inscription on the outside. They discovered they didn't need to put the little effigies on the inside anymore because we just hold the tablet. There's the invention of writing, is for contract law, because Kurt's going to forget and I'm going to hold him to it. And we're going to have and someone needs to decide. And it says so right there. There you go. That was my diversion.
Well, you know,
write it down. Write it down.
I had a photo on Laura and I kept on the wall that was one of my favorites, and it's one of the earliest cuneiform tablets, and it's a recipe for beer.
Excellent.
Which I thought was great. The argument is whether it certainly evolved for accounting.
Accountability and accounting is the same thing. Yeah.
I don't actually know the answer. I'm assuming you're right, but
Just
as
make
far
it
as
up, maybe. I don't know. I'm pretty certain that's a pretty accurate representation.
I'm pretty certain it's for keeping inventory.
It's all the same. It's like, where's our stuff and how much is there supposed to be in?
But that's right.
Accounting.
You need writing to cooperate because memories are both mutable, fungible, and fraudulent.
What could possibly go wrong, right? Oh my.
All right, so what I was trying to do today was say, well, the fundamental principle I was trying to get around the court is that the structure we have of the court is a representation of our group evolutionary strategy, which is the natural law. It's just another application, right? It's a market for adversarial competition, right? Where that's adjudicated by the market, period. Right. And in many cases, you have a referee. You have a judge as a referee. You have a couple of business owners as a referee. You have a couple of priests as a referee. You have, right. You have whatever you want. You need some sort of referee, right, in order to maintain the truth and whatever. You might have families as referees.
Yep.
Right? But essentially, the way historically, the way headmen are actually selected is you get put in a headman position because you're extremely generous. And it's because you're not selfish and you're generous, meaning you have few incentives to steal. You're a trustworthy decider, of conflicts, right? And so this is who becomes headman, is that the old guys who, of course, they're not looking for power or money or chicks anymore because they're old, right? And they just resolve differences.
They know better. It's like,
They-
let's be clear now. It's like,
And so they get their status by decision making. So I mean, in any event, I tried to make my one point that was the jury system is simply another application of markets, just like the market for association cooperation, production, reproduction, production of commons, of polities, war. Well, one of those markets is the market for dispute resolution. Where it goes in there, I'm not quite sure. It's
right.
probably between polities, dispute resolution, and war. It's probably that sequence. Right, and so that's the primary goal. The second purpose I want, the second point I was trying to make is that what you perceive as wrong is in fact wrong.
What you saw was wrong is correct. You were quite correct. And
there's absolutely no reason for it. There's no reason that courtrooms aren't basically customer service organizations.
what do you attribute it to? Malincentives? What do you see here?
I think what happens is people get tired of bullshit. Right, that's really it. I mean, and so the courts are trying to create a position of sacredness. So you have the lowest incentive and to some degree pressure. So you have the greatest incentives to avoid bullshit. And so I think that's the real thing. But that doesn't mean that people can't in the court don't need to be accountable, responsible, accountable, and providing of the public service that the public needs. Right now, I feel like the courts feel like they're trying to oppress the peasantry rather than resolve disputes. In other words, they're trying to oppress the peasantry rather than keep the king's peace.
Oh, this is interesting because I thought, well, my friend and dear friend of mine in town here is a judge, and he's a perfect judge. He's sharp and he tries to help the people and make it easy to make it do the right thing and avoid conflict. And I'm like, that guy he's right on the money. And it's like, he's like this, it's coming from outside. The pressure to cause this bullshit is being driven by other processes that are coming from like politics or something. I don't know quite where it's coming. It's like, there's like some hierarchy that I don't understand, which is like, organization, it's the bar, or there's an organization of judges. They have their own continuing educational processes that they must adhere to, and it's like there's this bullshit is being driven into the judge realm and the operation of the court realm, and I think it's political.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the same as everything else.
Yes,
Is if you create a set of norms, Germany, right? You could set up norms that are relatively rigorous, that everybody adheres to. You're actually creating some sort of framework with limits. And with that framework and limits comes a kind of reasoning within those limits. In other words, we all reason within our group strategies. We all reason within our group strategies, within our norms, within our group strategies. And we do that within our norms, within our group's means of reasoning.
right.
So you can't reason without consistency, and we tend to produce these consistencies. What they're trying to do is create this lie, this post-war period of lie of Martin, and this lie of diversity, right? And what they're doing is adding non-computability into the system.
Okay, so please disambiguate that, adding non-computability.
They're depriving they're trying to bring in relativism so they can have authority rather than morality. And in
I understand you.
Right. And so in order to do that, they're eradicating moral norms, and in doing so, eradicating the means of reasoning. So just like, as I said, the postmodern movement, the purpose of it is to destroy our ability to reason. Right? There is no truth, it's all relative, whatever. The feminine movement is to essentially likewise to deprive us of the utility of adjudication. of differences by reciprocal means, right? So this is a bunch of systems designed. So if you take people and you undermine their institutions of cultural production,
Oh,
one of which is their institution of ability to reason. And then you filter saturate the population with external parties who have different frameworks. All you've done is do what they always do, is they create disharmony in order to generate demand for authority, which only they can provide.
that's right. Now, I want to go over that just a little bit here. I'm making a timestamp for myself. Goes like this. It is the application of cultural hegemony for the purpose of generating an authoritarian system that they can manage.
Well, I'm not sure it's cultural hegemony. I think it's cultural undermining.
I know. So I would just, I'm not going to argue with you there. I want to discuss it from Gramsci's point of view, in which he said, Gramsci, the noted Italian Marxist who lived between 1899 and died in 1937, he was jailed by Benito Mussolini as a dangerous person, which he probably should have just hanged him because he was dangerous writing what he wrote. But whatever. That's just, I'm not here to judge on Benito and his stuff, right? So he talked about cultural hegemony, and which he defined as the cultural preferences of the elite are projected through the social, or we'll call it institutions of cultural production, into the general public. So Gramsci proposed the plan which we are talking about, which occurred in the 20th century, called by the famous German socialist Rudi Dutschke at the Long March Through the Institutions, which is, the plan is, one, we engage in a war of position within the cultural institutions you call undermining, which is take positions as the elite in those institutions and begin to project your cultural preferences into the general public through those institutions of cultural production. This is for the purpose of generating the conditions necessary for the revolution, which is phase two, the revolution. Phase three is the kinetic war, or the war of maneuver, they called it. And that is to wipe out the, what do they call them? They call them, I don't remember the right term. The people who resist, right? The leftovers, the remnants, what did they call them? I lose the term.
Doesn't matter. You've made your point.
There you go. So it is the, we're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
It's just, it's semantic differences. Okay. Anyway, Kurt, are you satisfied?
Well, I mean, what people sense is wrong, and it's all based on these lies. The problem is those are attractive lies to people who are not fit because of their culture or ability for the high cost of Western civilization.
Well,
they're just not fit for it.
I'm pointing at James Lindsay right now, right? Because he calls it bio-Leninism, and it is Leninism because it is bullshit that attracts the right flies to get them to do what you want them to do. You make a mob that will do what you want it to do. It's ancient plan.
And so the thing is, without a sufficient basis of truth, you can't eliminate those falsehoods. So what we've done is I've done is produce law with sufficient precision to eliminate such false promises, right? And so, and I've changed the scope of the law to include those externalities. But most of this is just to write down for the court what it's expected to do. In other words, and the behaviors for the court. That wasn't written down. Why? Because our ancestors lived in a world of tradition, right? The people who laid out this,
it never would have occurred to them to need to do so.
It was unnecessary. It's the same reason, like I say, if you haven't read Blackstone, you don't understand the Constitution, because the foundation for it's all in there. Of course, what do you think this country was based on? You think it was based on the Constitution. The institutions were. The law was based on Blackstone's understanding of the law. So the law operating within these institutions was Blackstone's understanding of natural law. Now he cast this in, late Enlightenment prose as, divine, but it's the same shit as I'm saying, right? It's the nature of the universe, right? It's the structure of the universe, and we don't get a freaking choice. And it's the same thing that Aquinas said. Look, when it comes down to the universe works this way, and we thought it did, sorry, the universe fucking works that way, right? I mean, it's the same goddamn thing. Or Aristotle's like, we might think this, but this is what the evidence says, right? So, and why did the Greeks come up with that? Because they were Indo-Europeans. Why does that matter? Because Indo-Europeans developed law first before the state and before organized religion. So we developed this law first, and then we developed the Greeks because we developed the law first. We developed the Romans because we developed the Greeks at scale. That all fell apart because we listened to we tolerated the Romans were as optimistic as we are because they're Indo-Europeans, because under trifunctionalism, you're tolerant of competition in your institutions. And in doing so, you let hostiles in to produce a new elite using a false promise that undermines your civilization from within by promising the Leninism, like the unfit, that they are being oppressed rather than the harms that they will naturally commit by their mere existence are being limited.
That was a fine synopsis. And it is the case. I'm satisfied, Kurt.
Well, so really, if I say I'm going to go cover, where is the courts? I'm not going to pull it up because that'll give you a dizzy spell. The economy, the treasury, the government of the states, man, where is this? The courts. Let's see if there's anything in particular here I should mention. Where are you? Down to Constitution. What went wrong? Our failures, the reforms, the Reformation, comprehensive law, the courts. So when I look at the courts, I mean, really, you just write down what I just said, right? And you say your courts are not allowed to grant itself special privileges by which they artificially limit the things they consider. In other words, the court must engage in full accounting.
Oh, I see. So this is like, we're not going to listen to that. It's like, what? We're not going to hear that one. What? That really blew my mind here in the last couple of years, just for your information.
What did?
They just refuse to listen to something. They don't want to hear the dispute. It's like, that's not a real dispute. You can't bring that to me.
Okay, the other, so I got to change some of this because it's just too mean, too insulting.
Hey, wait, that's a timestamp for Kurt noted that something that he wrote was too insulting. Like, oh my, that was Kurt saying, oh my.
I don't have to go through all these details. It's just going to bore the audience. I think that the primary one of the major differences is that added the sheriffs back into the court system. So you have police and sheriffs who can perform police duties, right? Then you have the court that provides it, but you have sheriffs that provide enforcement duties. In other words, the difference is who's the judge of last resort? The sheriff. The sheriff says, you can pass that fucking law, but we aren't going to apply it. You do anything you want, but it's not going to happen. Because it turns out that they're actually the best people to do that, which is amazing, right? How we preserve that culture,
yes,
is something I would like to spend a little time on, but it's basically that they're elected.
That's right.
Right. And that they have elected, and their scope of power, in other words, the number of people they're responsible for is small enough. So, that's really the issue. It's a power ratio issue. You give an order to the sheriffs to say, I'm not enforcing that, right? Then that doesn't matter. So that's your, you get the judge, and right, the check on the judge is the sheriff. And that's it. Now that's something that used to exist, but it needs to. I mean, and it does work in where we have independent sheriffs. You see this pop up around the country.
Yeah.
You can pass that law, but we won't enforce it.
And there's pushback between the federal laws and the sheriff in allowing the federals to come into his county without being supervised by the sheriff.
Right, that should never happen, ever. The reason this happened originally is because of they tried, the sheriffs in the South wouldn't enforce the anti-segregationist laws. And so that they felt it was necessary to go in there and conquer the South again, like they had conquered the first. Whereas segregation was working great for everybody. See how horrible it sounds? But I'm a scientist and I look at data, and people were doing better, and the Black family was doing better, and Black elites were doing better, and they were beginning to integrate properly before the relocation, the Soviet relocation plan applied to America was used to bring about what does Jones call it? The destruction of the cities.
Slaughter of the cities.
Slaughter
Hey,
of
I
the
want
cities.
to I want to get a red flag so that I can do this when you wave the flag, because it's like this that's calling out E. Michael Jones. Comment on this, talk to us, leave some comments below like everybody else is doing, because have a conversation about this. This is important stuff, because it's and the people who find it great offense with what Kurt just said, have a chat with them. If you don't agree, have a chat with them, because it's like it is understandably irritating to people of certain biases and prejudice what Kurt said, and it is decidedly false or true, and bring your evidence if you don't agree.
I tend to see this stuff as all this progressivism is infantile, because slavery would have been over in 30 years. The Black integration would have been completed in 30 years, and we would have had a preservation of the Black family. You wouldn't have had the destruction of our cities. All this do-gooding, right? This virtue seeking, by interfering with the epistemic process of human and group evolution, personal, group, and cultural, gradual development. All that interference, all that does is make it worse. So they destroyed the Black family. We're never going to recover that. Right? They destroyed the Black family by doing that. They destroyed our cities by doing that.
I would see this as like it was an intentional function for power.
I think
that's what E. Michael Jones would. I think he did
well,
make a very good argument to that effect.
Boom, boom, boom. Well, this is what we all tend to do. What do? We talk about series, we talk about spectrum, and we talk about hierarchies, because in any of these cases, there were a bunch of elites, people like me, who come up with ideas, right? There are a bunch of people who follow elites who want power. There's a bunch of people who follow the people in power because they want change, status. And there are people at the bottom who want change. And there are people at the below that who want rents.
Right.
For a free ride, right? So it's to say, well, it was for this. The problem is it sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy of common interest between, right?
Yes.
That produces a market demand, right? That generates a market demand for a solution to a problem. The thing is, our law didn't evolve, because this is a problem with law, is law evolves very slowly.
Yes.
Right. And we have the common law, which is the fastest of legal reform. And it's still the slowest. It's still slow.
Yeah.
And so the problem is that had our ancestors known what we know about genetics, neuroscience, behavioral economy, macroeconomy, and group evolutionary strategy. Had they had all that evidence, right, they would have been able to write the law, not as Blackstone has written it, but as Doolittle has written it. Not as Aquinas wrote it, not as Blackstone wrote it, not as Doolittle has written it, right? You have to have the knowledge to update the law. So the thing is, people say the Constitution's a living document. No, it isn't. It's an accounting system for the transactional modification of a set of rules, right?
Right.
What's the problem? That accounting system doesn't include full accounting.
Right.
Doolittle's accounting includes full accounting. When I say the demonstrated interests all humans pursue, that spectrum of demonstrated is a full accounting.
Right.
Because that's what's possible for humans to invest in.
Right. Across all spectrum of human potential experience.
Correct. So that's it. So the problem is our Constitution doesn't fully account for the defense of demonstrated interests across the whole spectrum that people demonstrate an interest, right? And so what I've done is I've enumerated in painful detail y'all can't stand every that forces me to do long chains of reasoning and repeat long series of nouns.
It's like hitting the play button on a bot.
I had one of those little Casper dolls as a baby, right?
Yeah, buddy.
And you pulled it would say some Casper thing. I could never understand what it was saying, but right, I feel like a Casper.
Yeah, buddy. Man, we want to make that doll. Sell that doll, baby. That's what I'm talking about.
So, but in the end, this annoying detail is necessary to prohibit ambiguity. It's the necessary and sufficient disambiguation to produce a full accounting of possible demonstrated interests of people. So everything, people just continuous recursive disambiguation producing a condition of unambiguity, right? I mean, that's really what it is. And these series are necessary to prevent it.
Yes.
So these series and this, it's like a big logical bomb we're producing here on people. And I understand.
It's big but it's doable. And it is what I would call, what we're doing is exhausting the opportunity for liars and lies.
Yes.
That's all.
Yeah, well, as I said, in the end, that's all like I said, the fundamental insights testimony.
Right.
And in the end, all we're doing is we're spending all this work to make it possible to move from property, a law focused primarily on property, to a law that also includes information. Right?
That was wonderful.
Right? That's really what we're doing. It just is a big fucking job.
It's a job. It's a big job. And what's interesting is it's difficult to and it's difficult for an outsider to appreciate what indeed it is.
Yes.
That's what I think. It's because it's like, okay, this is a big job, and it is a useful job, an important social task being performed here, and essential and unavoidable, I think. Although they will try hard to avoid it, I'm pretty sure. Those that have malincentives will seek to maintain those you would call criminal incentives.
Yes.
That's all.
I also, just by the way, can I go back into a few details about the court? So there's some things that are wrong, like the right to privacy, right? If you have a public crime, the public has a right to its information.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a private dispute, the public has no right to participation in that. Why are our divorce records, our civil disputes, why are these records public? It should be the opposite. So why this privacy? I cover a lot of detail, like there's this confusion over search and seizure. I reverse a lot of this bullshit that's been brought about. The fun one is I restored the right of the men to fight, right? Duel.
Right.
Yeah, I extend the choices the court has for rectification of behavior. I really enforce the 3 convictions quite a bit. I deal a lot with fees being proportioned to the hours of work time vary based on median income. In other words, I try to make
Proportionality.
the proportionality realistic. I specifically say that the people have the right to impose severity like capital punishment, exile, ostracization, territorial prohibitions, physical punishment, hard labor, restitution, fines, and demands of service. I try to enumerate the whole spectrum of things that's available, right? Because I don't want anything prohibited by moralizing, right? There are some things you need to hang that fucking guy. I mean, recriminalize sex predation, and I specifically disambiguate it. I add the right to be forgotten, which kind of kills the whole social credit system. If you don't have a reputation, you have the right to build a new one. If you have a bad one, well, build a new one. Well, you're going to be treated like somebody who's going to build a new one, and they're going to wonder why, but you have the right to be forgotten by anybody but essentially the court.
Right.
Privacy. I encourage judges, or encouraging the judge to use creative remedy in the moderate the alteration of behavior. You see this in the best judges. They understand what's wrong with some kid.
Yes.
And they sent my cousin in the military. It's exactly what he needed.
Nice.
Right? There's nothing wrong with this kid other than he needed
positive help a little bit, right? That's all.
His father was an asshole, right? He's just a product of an asshole, right? And so my cousin went and he came out what I consider an angel, right? I mean, there's just judges need to feel that's where their discretion lies.
Responsibility, right?
For remedy, but
fix it.
Not lazy remedy. Some guys really irritate the shit out of me. Every time I go to court and I watch some person prosecuted because they're poor, it pisses me off, right? I mean, lumping another $2,500 fine in a guy who makes $150 a week.
Yeah,
that's a crime. It doesn't do anything, right? Because he's all you're doing is making it worse, right? What's his real problem? The guy's real problem needs to be sentenced. Not sentenced, I mean this in a positive sense, to a trade school.
Yeah.
Right, where he's got where he's fed and slept well enough to actually learn something instead of cycling down. This is, I have another one. Just made me so pissed. I almost got up and did something about it.
Oh my.
So this guy is an Asian guy, clearly, clearly either first or second generation. He's got a fine, right? He has to waste the whole day in. He works by the hour, right? He gets paid nothing, right?
Yeah.
He has to spend a whole day to come to court to explain why he can't pay the $80 for the last fine. Well, the reason he can't pay the $80 is because he spent, it's just
nonsense.
It's nonsense, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that,
Yes, on like a litany of tragedy is what it is.
We need to get, and it's one thing when the guy, it's like the guys who get in court all the time because they hang out with other people, they get in a fight defending their honor, and I'm like, I don't know why he's here, because both of these guys had no problem being in the fight.
Right.
Who
made the complaint? Who's
complaining here?
Right. It's
right?
like
all the guys who stood around and had fun watching.
It's disturbing. What it is. This would be described as disturbing the king's peace previously.
Well, but it's only disturbing the king's peace if it produces an externality.
Well, we're in agreement.
Two guys who want to smack each other around because I insulted your manliness, right? That's actually good policing.
Yeah,
right?
they're working it out, man. It's like, this needs to be resolved.
It's like no harm, no foul means no lasting harm. Nobody lost an eye. Nobody had brain damage.
Right. It's just limited. So I want to make sure that I want to invite E. Michael Jones and James Lindsay to have a conversation with you, because I think that will be useful. I don't know how, but I'm just suggesting it.
I love both of these guys. I realize I'm nuclear, and I think it will be a while before consider that they don't.
It's not your nuclear, it's your legend. It's your nuclear.
My legend is nuclear.
Yes, sir.
And for reasons I understand, it's not like I hold it against them. So the rest of it, the rest of everything I wrote about the court is just a clarification of the stuff that we've already known. I mean, to put it in perspective, it's not there's the things we know that's wrong with the process of jurisprudence in this country, like the procedural abuse or what we call legal abuse, right? These things are easy to fix, right? The customer service aspect is easy to fix, right? But let's flip it around. It's like I say with legislation. If you go into most court decisions and you go into most legislation, it's actually way better than you think. It's because we only see the absurd shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the news. We only see the stupid stuff, right? You don't see all the good stuff people do every day, right? Right. I mean, I saved a dog the other day, right? I don't know if I told you about this, but I saved a dog the other day, right?
Nice.
A dog ran across the road as a young puppy. I pull over, I grab, chase the dog into a corner, and I grab the dog, and turns out the owner is nearby. I give it to the owner, and I said, don't let people walk your dog who don't have voice control of your dog. Your dog's a puppy. Other people can't walk your dog yet. Right. Right. And especially when you could get loose and get across a major street where the dog takes a dead heat across it. It's only a fucking statistical miracle that he isn't dead, because I almost ran him over too. Right. So, right. So, nobody sees that shit. People do good shit all day long, every day. Right. I mean, so somebody sees that. So we see it. So yeah, the courts have very specific problems, but they're actually fixable. Our legislation has very serious problems, but they're fixable. Our finance system has very serious problems, but they're fixable. Our economy has very serious problems, but they're fixable. Our education system has catastrophic problems, but they're fixable. The total war against our institutions of cultural production, not destroy the West from within, that's catastrophic, but it's easily fixable once you know the answer, right? So the thing is that you can't piecemeal this change, right? Because the problem with democracy is especially the kind of democracy we have, an incredible friction against corrections of irreciprocity or privilege that are performed by the state and its actors.
So it's an inertia built into the system based on preference and bias that wishes to maintain its position.
Yeah, and so you have a terrible conspiracy between the wishful thinkers, right? That have an irrational expectation of human behavior,
Right.
right? Those afraid to make the hard decisions about what to do with those very bad human beings, right?
Yep.
And the people who are engaged in the intentional destruction of our civilization from within, because that's civil, right? And the people underneath those intentional conspirators who are by common interests following that lead.
This group that you're saying are intentionally seeking to destroy Western civilization, I look at them as well-intentioned, like wrecking balls.
Well, except that I know, and they're of a certain ethnic group who've told me personally, the best thing in the world is for white people to go away.
I know.
The best thing in the world is for white people to lose power. Right. Well, I'm like,
Okay, right. I'm not in Western civilization. And right, we're in agreement. I understand.
Right.
So they're understanding what they're doing then.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and they're complicit in something there that's not kosher.
If you begin with a false premise, right? Like I said, your metaphysics is based on a false premise. That metaphysics will permeate through your cultural, your doctrinal, your normative, and your ordinary speech.
Right.
And because your world, your mind works by, is bad at compartmentalization and is bad at conflict, it will try to create homogeneity or consistency across that spectrum. So the minute you begin with a false premise, right, you're screwed. And so these people believe this false premise.
Okay.
Now, I'll bring this up to the last session we had.
Yeah.
We talked about how the academy
Yes.
tries to solve for good before it gets to true, but
Yes.
they don't realize that very decision leads them to produce the wrong conclusions.
Yes.
It leads them to monopoly.
Yes.
Right. So instead of the answer is quite counterintuitive, is you want cultural homogeneity with the division of labor on top of it.
Now, I want to make sure that I understand you correctly. Metaphysics, it translates to a group evolutionary strategy.
Within your group evolutionary strategy, there you have a metaphysics. A metaphysics is a set of presumptions about the way of the world is, or the way the universe is, or the way people are. So a metaphysical presumption is like presuming there's gravity.
Presumptive bias, then.
It's a presumptive bias. You may or may not be aware of it. The common one we talked about yesterday is Western nouns and objects versus Eastern verbs and materials, right? I mean, that's a metaphysical difference with profound consequences. The difference between your Asian harmony through non-conflict and European harmony through conflict, right? Competition, right? Competition, not conflict, through conflict, is a metaphysical difference, which vastly frames your issue.
Right.
If you have the feminine cognitive bias, the Jews do, or if you have the masculine cognitive bias, the Europeans, you're going to base your judgment of everything in the world that you experience on this difference between the two. And you're going to find that in conflict. So it turns out that feminine intuition is useful at small scale, only at small scale. And masculine intuition is valuable at large scale. And so this will explain why, for example, the most educated people in Europe, the Jews, produced nothing of value for 2,000 years until they were integrated into Aristotelian reason in the 18th and the 19th and 20th century. Moreover, it explains why Europeans developed extraordinary innovations during their pre-Christian period and during their late and post-Christian period, in other words, after the Aristotelian Restoration. So these metaphysics have profound consequences on what you do and what you seek. So we are not, the problem with metaphysics is they're not like the scientific laws. You can write down a scientific law, right?
Yeah.
But The problem is that, and so you can know it, and you can know you know it.
Right.
Right? The problem with metaphysical laws is you may not know that you know it. They may not know that you rely on it. It's a premise, whether conscious or not.
Right.
So, for example, what am I trying to do by the Jews wrote down their law in the Torah? I'm writing down our law. Why? Because that group evolutionary strategy of optimum evolutionary computation by the reciprocal insurance of self-determination by self-determined means by test of sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity, display word and deed, and markets for association, cooperation, production, reproduction, dispute resolution, polities, and war, at the cost of the suppression of the reproduction of those unfit, demonstrably unfit by their actions for those markets, is the Western group evolutionary strategy. And therefore, you need to define just those terms and the means by which we must, minimum natural rights, we must obey to hold them. That, well, if you write that down, you know it. But we've been living it for 5,000 years. But we didn't know it.
I know.
So we're right.
This is, I want to point to the fact, the doubling down function, which goes to you call it moral outrage.
Outrageous.
Moral outrage. And it's like, so the group evolutionary strategy is driven to moral outrage when there's an existential threat noted.
Yeah.
That's when you double down, is when you note an existential threat. We don't have time to compute anymore. We don't have time to think. We are going to go based on our intuitive functions.
Okay, can I
I would like you to.
So what happens is our brains are organized to acquire and to prevent loss, to maintain stasis, to acquire more, and to prevent loss, right? We're just a thermometer. That's what's sitting down in your brain stem right there, is a thermometer. We call it homeostasis, right? So what happens is, whenever you're producing, whenever your metaphysics says about the world, like I have a family view of the universe, a communist view, where we're all equal.
Right.
Or I have a national view, a civic view, or a national view, or a civilizational view.
Yeah.
You are making presumptions about what is reciprocal, reciprocal and proportional. The problem is, can you calculate proportionality in the family? Well, of course you can. Can you calculate proportionality at the nation level? No. Can you calculate it at the civilization level? No. Or at the world? No, you can't. You can't, because there's too many factors involved, too many causal axes involved. So what you can do instead is say, I live in a world of the middle class. Therefore, your claim constrains me from reciprocity and proportionality. Now, difference, the female considers proportionality equality, and the male perceives proportionality as meritocracy, right? And so what happens is that you have this natural conflict in our predictive measurements between the male and female first, and the class and scale second. Class second and scale third. Yes. So if you're a member of the underclass and you feel like you're always threatened by being left behind, yet you're paying what you perceive as normative costs. In other words, you think you're being a good person, then you will desire proportionality. What is your proportionality? Is it equality or is it meritocracy?
Which do I gain from?
Which do you gain from? Well, that's the right answer. You did it again.
Oh, kids.
But I mean, if you take it as sex bias, class bias, right? Civil bias, right? And civilizational bias. You're talking about somewhere in there, my scale of measurement of reciprocity and proportionality, especially when proportionality is different between meritocracy and equality, female equality herd, male equity, which is by hierarchy, right? Then you're going to judge the world events differently. So essentially, each of us has a slightly varied accounting system. And what we're saying is, I want, right? At one time. What we're saying also is, I agree to.
Right.
And we're saying that because I paid this cost, I paid this cost.
Right.
So there's people who don't refuse to pay a cost because they think they're due more. Those are the bad people.
You owe me.
Right? Those are bad people. And there's a lot of bad people. There are people who pay the cost as the best cost I can pay. And okay, well, I'm going to subsidize you then, right? As long as you don't have too many kids, right? And there are people who say, I can pay, but I'm afraid of risk. Can you risk insure me? There's people who say, I'm okay either way, right? I can manage. There's people who says, well, I've succeeded enough that I have opportunities, and I've also eliminated risk. There's people who says, I don't have any concerns or risks at all, and I have a lot of influence. So you have this whole thing. Everybody's doing this calculation. Right?
It's a social influence, or what would you call it? The calculation is
they're calculating whether the world as they understand it is reciprocal by their terms of demand.
So it's reciprocal. They're weighing the world, their impression of the world, the way it's operating, versus their moral intuition.
Right. So they have a gut feeling, but their gut feeling usually is extremely uneducated.
Right.
Right. So you find that people who study economics, they get out of that trap. Unless they call it Marxist economics, which is a contradiction in terms. So what you have is that people will say, my favorite one is we. Well, there is no we. There's you and there's me, and there's only a we if I want to.
Right.
But because you think in family and herd, you think I have an obligation to you. It's because there is a we first before there's an I. But the pack doesn't work that way. Right. There's an I first, and I join the pack I want.
Right.
Right. So you're involuntarily a part of a herd, and I'm listing most of the variables. It's not that many. It seems like a lot, but humans are really bad at multidimensional analysis.
It's too much work, man. It's
too much fucking work. Right? But I'm listing most of the variables that are in there. And this, like if you add neuroticism, obviously it's going to go, your fear is going to go up and you're going to want. Right? If your selfishness, your self-image is higher than it really is. In other words, there's a disconnect between your sense of market value and your demonstrated market value. You're going to be that little bitchy girl that says that she's due more, because whatever.
You're not going to bend her standards, right?
Right. And the answer is no, you're just not, your market value is too low. And every time you open your mouth, you decrease your market value.
Right.
Right. And so all that's happening is that you're feeling better about your self-destruction of your market value.
Yes.
I have a particular woman, a little Jewish girl in mind, who just worked for us. And she kept every attempt at self-righteousness, right, was pathetic.
Stop digging take the shovel away from her.
Yeah, just take away her shovel, right?
Right.
And sometimes that's just because you're in the wrong circumstance.
Right.
Like you might be in a circumstance where you think social value is important and it's not. You might be in a situation where you think empirical value is important and it's not. Right. So you might
I want you to know, wait, Kurt, this is important. I was in a political hearing and I thought being right was important.
No, exactly.
It's like, that taught me a lot. Shit. It's all good, man. So
So
it's
you
doubling down. We're talking about doubling down.
Well, we're trying to explain that there are a finite, that the underlying thing is maintaining homeostasis, getting gains. Then you have sex difference in gains. Then you have class differences in the ability to seek gains and prevent losses.
Right.
Then you have civilizational or cultural differences in time and space that help you obtain or prohibit it. And then you have contextual, like, am I working with the right people? Right. And so, and then you have circumstantial, which is, is the kind of work I'm doing right now actually making me better at what's going to make me successful in those things that I sense perceive. The problem is across that hierarchy, which, as I just showed you, isn't that deep.
Right.
It's not that you can enumerate all the major influences. We can get down to intelligence and personality traits. That's going to be class, right?
Right.
So is if you're trying to fit where you don't belong, it's not going to work, right?
Feel that one.
You're going to feel it. But if you feel where you belong, so the problem is, if you believe your market value is higher than it is, you're going to fail. Yes. Right. And you see a lot of that. I see that all the time.
When does the doubling down happen?
Right. So what? Oh, I didn't. You're just always just a little bit ahead of me.
I apologize, Kurt. I don't want me to steal any thunders or anything.
No. I'm just teasing you. But what you're really trying to do is rush me along.
I'm not trying to rush you along.
You are trying to rush me along?
I'm just trying to make sure you're not getting lost. I'm trying to hang with you, brother. The rabbit hole's getting long, brother.
So the hierarchy, male-female differences, it isn't that. It's completely explicable. So the question is, do you possess the competency to self-measure? Right? And we don't give the people the tools to self-measure.
In fact, we're robbing them of that capacity.
We're robbing them of it, and they're doing it on purpose.
That's rude.
It's cruel. It's why people are unhappy.
It's disorienting.
And so we did it with the enemy did it with false promises.
And participation.
That hierarchy doesn't exist.
What?
The one I just explained?
No,
you suck.
Sorry. That was awesome. Wait,
I took that one all the way down my throat.
Finger, man.
I took that hook deep. So you have this.
Okay.
Damn it. I'm trying to concentrate here. All right, so you have this definite divergence, right? So this is what manifests. And so, on the conservative side, you get the guy who thinks because he's willing to be responsible, willing to fight, willing to work hard, willing to obey the law, whatever, and he's been deprived of that opportunity. He demonstrates really bad behavior. Well, because the difference is he's not asking for rents. He's asking for responsibilities. The person on the left is not asking for responsibilities. He's asking for rents. Both of these people are mutually unhappy because of the falsehood. So what's being generated? Demand for authority, which promises falsely that it can resolve the conflict that it itself made by this deceit, this false promise, and this undermining of institutions. Because it isn't possible to bring about this fantastical world that's free of, that violates the physical laws of the four laws of the universe, the logical and the three physical. You're not going to get away from it. So that's not going to happen.
E. Michael Jones calls this culture wars.
Of course.
What you're calling undermining, which Gramsci called cultural hegemony, and Long March Through the Institutions. And it points to this other thing that E. Michael Jones talked about, which is the denial of logos by certain factions. That's all. I think you've identified it quite properly as
Well,
well.
I mean, we all use terms. The difference with my terms is they're from first principles, right? I mean, it's from cause. I give causal.
Most specificity.
Right. I just give causal relations, and they're describing phenomenon, right? Which is fine.
Right.
And so the difference with Lindsay, he's saying this is where it came from, and I'm saying the science of why it got there, right? I mean, we're not no. It's like you say, there's a lot of people, not
That's
a
right.
lot, but there's some of us that are working this problem, and I'm working it from the scientific point. What's his name? Lindsay's working it from the literary or philosophical point, the history of
Interestingly, but Lindsay doesn't seem to understand he points it's like the genesis of the errors that are being made. He's all about knows where it came from and how it came into being, but he doesn't seem to be pointing at the nature of the problem of the error. What does it lead to? Does that make sense?
Let's not ask everybody to do everything.
No, I understand. No, I'm not. I'm just. It's clarification because he's right.
I think he's aware of the landmines, though. What I've been very proud of him over the past 5 or 6 weeks is that he's coming to that painful recognition.
When he can't avoid it.
That he can't avoid it much longer.
It's like, wait, it's the drain. He's circling the drain closer and closer.
And I have a lot of respect for the guy because he's like, I don't want to go there. You can tell he doesn't want.
Well, he's a good liberal guy, and it's like he's
I
like
don't
a
want to go
classic
there.
liberal.
Damn.
Wait, and it's the event horizon because
right.
I know what's on the other side, and Kurt's over there.
Yeah. And I don't want to be an outcast like Kurt, which I understand completely. It's not,
Cool. It's understandable.
I'm not dependent on people liking me, thankfully.
Right.
So Lindsay's getting there, and then Jones is getting them from the more traditional cultural perspective. But then we go back to the other people in the field, and you look at people trying to get around this problem, and the answer is what I've said, which is they don't have enough cross-disciplinary knowledge to be able to identify the problem, and the problem is far harder than they think it is.
And what the demand for pain and irritation is much higher than people want to bear.
Yeah, it's very
irritating.
I can slaughter my own sacred cows and complain about it, but I can still leave them dead on the lawn, right? I mean, most people can't do that. The worst problem is if you're in a social group or an employment group.
Right. Now you have a behavioral investment that you have a difficulty severing yourself from because they're going to get mad at you when you put the
right, and it might have economic impact on you.
Yep.
And so I understand why nobody else wants to go there. But I went off and made myself a early retiree in my 40s, so I could devote my life to this problem.
Strong word.
So, and I have autistic and moral instincts that are they just maybe hate that problem more than other people do. Right. So I'm willing to pay the cost.
So we'll pay the cost, right.
So in the end, I was trying to make a point there. Oh, because you were trying to get me to double down.
Double down.
So what I was trying to get to is that people don't have a system of self-measurement because they've been intentionally deprived of the ancestral means of self-measurement. And they've been given a false promise of a new one that has done nothing except make commensurability of thought impossible, right? Which generates decreasing cognitive ability in the population, which generates decreasing ability to find consensus, which generates demand for the authority that only these left authoritarians can provide, which the purpose of which is to bring about revolution of the unfit, right? Which is really what it is. Let's just say it. It's the revolution of the unfit against the fit, which starts out, then turns to violence to exterminate the fit.
Leninism.
It's Leninism, which is what they're doing. Hillary Clinton is an avowed Leninist, right? That's what she studied, right? So their purpose is not creative, it's destructive. If they had a creative solution, they would propose it. Well, why do I say critique is obvious? Because if you're trying to undermine, you're not providing a competitive solution that's equally criticizable. Why is that? Because you actually can't create a solution that's equally criticizable, that would survive scrutiny. And so what you do is obtain power by destroying and generating authority instead of obtaining power by creative productivity. And so my job is to deprive those people of means of destruction. In other words, to explain the concept of total war and to prevent their warfare against production, and to state what the truth is so that we can measure variation from the truth. Doesn't mean
this was what would I argue that this is fifth generational warfare.
Yes. So what people say to me, well, why do we all have to think in this way and speak in this way? And I said, you don't, because what happens is if you lay out rules, right? You lay out very clear rules in the law, they're via negativus, right? What happens is people creatively invent ways of working within the law, right? Doesn't mean that people won't try to continually get outside of it. We all do. But if the law is fully accounted enough, in other words, complete enough, then it becomes very hard to get outside of that law. And since I'm not sure what's available for humans to sense, perceive beyond the limits of human perception, I can't possibly predict that, but I'm not sure anything can be.
No, I think you are certain that it cannot be predicted,
Right.
because it's like this, it's just the best articulation of the truth, which we cannot falsify. It's
Right.
within the limits of our articulatory capacity.
So given those limits, like given the limits of physics, given the limits of chemistry, given the limits of biology, given the limits of genetics, all right, do what you can. I don't really, it doesn't matter as long as it's not irreciprocal, meaning false or then it's fine. It may be, as long as it's not immoral, it may be amoral, meaning irrelevant, or it may be moral.
Right. So it's like this it's fair. As long as it's not irreciprocal, it's fair game.
Right. And so if you want to have a world, like I said, if we know what the truth is, it's a system of measurement. If you want to go off and create your little commune, you're going to have X consequences from it. Go ahead. That you might be able to make it work. So far, it doesn't. So far, libertarianism is basically a form of communism, right? Communism, not communism, right? It's a form of communes.
So
it's a belief that you can have a thing without paying the external costs of maintaining what it is, right? Well, if you want to go create a commune, go ahead. If you want to create libertarians, the problem is they can't survive because they don't pay sufficient costs, which is really why you're attracted to them, because they don't require you to pay costs, right? And so the thing is, you might think you can live in that world, but you can't because you're not willing to pay the cost. Now, if you want to create a commune on a new planet somewhere or build a little spaceship with it and create a commune that's closed, right? A closed system, that might be able to work. If you want to create a libertarian utopia, I guarantee you will end up with a classical liberal society. No matter what you do, you're going to end up with some sort of rule of law and some sort of decision-making group. And it's just going to happen because that's what has to happen when you have more than a family. So anyway, but you wanted me to I'm still trying to get to doubling down, believe it or not. I really am. I'm trying to get there and just don't seem to be able to get through the weeds to get to that. But anyway, so what happens when you have developed, when your hierarchy has built a metaphysics based on something that is not informed by what's true, right?
Non-correspondent.
When it's non-correspondence, when your belief that your value, you're very competent, whatever, when whatever your wants are out of line with your market value in that system.
Yes.
Right. you're going to be bothered, right?
Yes.
Now, if conversely, if you are aware of your market value, you're probably going to be fine,
Yes.
right? Somewhere. So the, right, it's pretty, it's not.
I'll comment later. I'm not going to comment. I don't want to
So,
distract
so,
you.
so the problem is what we do when we if we create a moral hazard. In other words, excuse me, the opposite. When we create moral outrage, is we imply a cost of opportunity. We're imposing a cost of opportunity for you to maintain your status, meaning reciprocity and proportionality, as you perceive it.
Okay, so
Or it's a very simple calculation your brain is doing.
okay, and it's
Would the consequences of this cause me a loss?
Okay, so demonstrate your value. Does that make sense? It's like you're making them demonstrate their value compared to their perceived value.
You're making them demonstrate what they perceive their value is, right? So
you're calling the question. You're like, show me. You're calling them. Show me your hand.
Let's get.
I'm asking.
Yeah, that's too far advanced. So all that's happening is you're saying you're going to cost me, right? You're going to cost me. No, when I invoke your moral outrage,
okay,
you're saying you're taken from me. Usually it's taking your opportunities from you, right? In other words, your predictive ability, and that prediction is based on your metaphysical presumptions, right? It's not really based on reality. Because if I talk to you about taking something from your house, you see that as a criminal act. But the reason you get moral outrage, is because it's an impact on the opportunities.
Okay.
You're narrowing the field of opportunities which the person can exploit.
So it stems from a diminished sense of opportunities.
Right. You're decreasing my
Social
potential
opportunities
to acquire, and therefore you're decreasing my future inventory. So think of it like this way. If I steal your pencil, right, that's immediate and now.
Yeah.
But if I steal your opportunities, that's perpetual.
That's worse. That's much worse.
It's cumulative because it's perpetual.
Right.
So your brain is doing what it should.
A lot of math.
It's doing a forecast of the impact on you over time. That's why people double down.
Because it's now it demands them to be outraged to
right.
That's demonstrating their interest in maintaining the future gains that they see as potentially lost due to the fact of the situation.
Oh, you did that really well. Even for Brad, that was good. Yes. So it's troubling how I tell people your self-image, status, and opportunities. It's creepy how accurate we are.
Oh yeah, no, it's like that's a social animal that has that built in. It's like I know where I'm at. But what's
because what is your status? Your access to opportunity.
That's it.
What's your self-image? Your willingness to pursue opportunity in a social needs. So right? Your status is your access to the cost of opportunities. People will protect their status more than their assets.
I understand you.
Right. So what is that? So what are we talking about? We're measuring the sum of future opportunities. So why do we double down so aggressively?
Because it's threatening my future.
Your future, my cumulative futures.
Yeah.
Right. So we double down. Now we don't, this is all happening at an animal level.
Yes. Right.
It's like if you like bump your knee, break your leg, or lose an eye, those are your future opportunities are radically decreased by these things. Yeah. You don't care if you bump your knee, you're decreasing your opportunity to move around the house really quickly for the next 3 weeks, right? If you break your leg, you're decreasing your opportunity to participate in some activities for the next, was it 6 weeks?
10 weeks, yeah.
10 weeks. For me, I had cancer. Like, I just decreased my potential to live a long time, right? Right. That was a high cost, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're going to change a lot. So the point I'd like to get across is doubling down is a natural reaction to defensive opportunities that have been acquired by the use of your metaphysical value judgments.
Mm,
Does that make sense?
yes.
And so the problem is, why do you double down? What else can you do? I know how to get, we're advanced versions of the mouse remembering how to get to the fucking cheese.
Right, right.
Right? Metaphysical value judgments is the presumption that the cheese is in the same fucking place.
Still there, man.
So it's just neural economy.
Right.
Your brain is saying, I can't recalculate that.
But the doubling down comes as a result of the threat being imposed or suggested, which is
over time, cumulatively. So the number's big. In other words, so you it's one thing to say, I'm going to steal your pencil or your car, right? But it's another to say, I'm going to steal your career. And it's another to say, I'm going to steal your ability to work with others to produce this security. Right? This is so
this
what
is,
you,
so this is so yeah, my contention is that the society is increasingly polarized in this time of crisis, and it will result in doubling down. It must result in increasing doubling down. Inevitably, because the crisis must be resolved by some means, and the only means is going to be through doubling down. We get to the solution because we have to negotiate the solution, or we have a war.
We're going to crash, right? We're going to war. Actually, let's put it the other way. We're going to solve it. It's not going to happen. We're going to crash. Well, we're going to propose it to happen. How to happen. But I mean, we're not going to negotiate a system without a significant change to our system. In other words, it's not going to. Something's big has to change.
That's right.
We're gonna have a crash because we didn't do that, and then we'll pick up the pieces. Or we're gonna have a war and we're gonna pick up the pieces. Now, of course, I predicted a war because I can't see a resolution of this dispute. My goal was, can I provide a solution deep enough that it provides a solution necessary to avoid a crash or war? My belief that was happening was based on my wishful thinking and naivety.
Right.
Now,
this is the wishful thinking I had about when the car appeared 6 feet in front of my car at 30 miles an hour, and I'm like,
yes,
maybe I can stop fast enough. And I'm like, yeah, good luck with that, big boy.
So
I understand.
So instead, I suspect we will get close to crash. And people will start looking for answers.
That's what will happen,
right?
Because
or
it's the doubling down process is an orienting thing, functioning that has to occur.
Or the crash will occur. It will be impossible to propose a solution. We will have a war, after which we pick up the pieces. At which point, people will be ready for a solution.
Yes.
So I sort of was hoping we could get 2 million guys together and propose this, so it would be in the public mind that there was an answer. Then when you're looking at the crash coming, you're like, this is enough, let's fix this. Or you're looking at the war coming, you say, this is enough, this fixes. But I wanted to interject it into the public consciousness that there is a really obvious, easy solution to the problem, because Western civilization is built on it.
Wait. I'm taking great exception to what you just said. Really obvious. It only took me 20 years to figure this out. And Brad, to help me to get less mad enough to explain it to the general public.
Poor choice of words. Put it this way. Once you understand it, the fact that this will work is obvious.
It's so easy, Kurt. That's what I'm living for, man.
You hard.
That was a great ending. That's all I can ask for, because you clarified this doubling down process, which is quite simply explained. Everything looks good. We have a solution. We're just trying to make it known as quickly as possible. So we're working on the finish of the book. You happy?
I'd be happy if I was in a room,
Okay.
right? I was in a room, and you were over there on the other side of the room doing whatever you do. And or maybe I was in next door to you, and I could sit there, and I had my peace of mind that Dr. Brad was around.
I'm right here, man.
And I could open the door and say, I had this thought. Does this sound crazy to you? Right. And I could close the door and go back to work. I need some variation on that, because sitting here staring at a screen in a place I can't stand is not working for me.
I know, I understand you. I'm working on this. I'm working on this problem. I haven't told anybody my solutions are nuts. I'll talk to you about that later.
Okay. Well, anyway, we had a couple of great talks today.
Yeah, and this weekend was great, and we'll talk again tomorrow, I think.
Okay, and tomorrow we've got the court. Now we can do the state. The state, I didn't want to go, once you get into, it's kind of important to get down to those rights, because that's really important.
Yes.
Talking about the courts, I mean, that's pretty easy, really. I mean, we know what's wrong with the courts. I don't have to, I was like, if I go through this is going to be boring as fuck. Right? The state is interesting. It's an interesting conversation, because people tend to confuse the state and the government.
That's right.
Instead of the state, the government, the court, right? These are different things. And so what the court, state, the government, the court, the treasury, the economy, right? The interior. Those are, when you have the individual discussions, tends to be pretty interesting. All right. So we'll cover the state tomorrow.
All right. I'm going to stop.
Thanks, brother.
Well, don't go away.